Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Educator, historian, Dr. Alan Singer, expert, perspective guru for a lot of the issues we tend to want to deal with. And so we're always happy to have him with us. A lot going on in the world. We're taping this on a Thursday, and I believe, what's the date?
It's the 12th.
12th of October, and it will show up on YouTube, and it'll show up sometime in October at mnn.org. That's Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and a couple of other places. I think we put it up on LinkedIn and wanted to put, but anyway, look for us, especially on YouTube, and we'll put it up on Facebook too. But the big gorilla in the global room is in the Mideast, but while that gorilla is sucking up all the oxygen, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on right just here in the United States alone that we should at least say, remember, and Bob, remember the UAW? What's going on with the UAW?
Well, the workers there, and you're right, Eric, there's so much going on that's being pushed aside by the news out of the Middle East. But yeah, the auto workers are staging strategic strikes on strategic locations for the big three, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, which is the old Chrysler, et cetera, and Jeep. And they're doing it. I remember when I was living in Milwaukee, there was a plant that put out the undercarriages for trucks. And so the strikes are strategic like that. They're going after plants that affect other plants, so that if one is out, another will run out of parts. And so it puts the stress on negotiating without shutting everything down and sending everybody home. But yeah, it's still underway, and there's still a ways to go. I believe Ford is closer than the others towards an agreement.
You're right. The interesting thing, Bob, is, because I've been out of the country, but when I got back, I tried to catch up while I was out of the country. And guess what? The Ford plant, one of the biggest Ford plants somewhere in the Southeast, is where they just said, uh-oh, you guys aren't coming to the table properly. We're walking here. And I think it's like 8,500 workers or something to that effect. And so it's a massive new rolling strike to hit the big three where their pocketbook is what I think. Speaking of rolling strikes, what else? Alan, I think I saw something about the Culinary Workers in Las Vegas getting ready to strike. First time they've struck in like 30 years or something to that effect.
Well,
they don't have
the actor strike is continuing. There's now a threatened strike in Walgreens. I think what we're seeing is the impact of inflation, and the corporate profits are stable, and workers, because of inflation, our money is worth less. I think what the auto workers have said is that in 2008, with the financial crisis, they basically took wage freezes to protect the companies. Well, companies are now doing all right, and they've never caught up. And that's been the situation in the United States because of the assault by Republicans and assault by corporations against unions.
Why were you so generous about corporate profits are stable? Their CEOs are making gazillion millions of dollars every year. So they ain't worried about profits being stable. They pay these CEOs gigantic dollars. And, every time I look at that disparity, just that one industry alone, let's just look at the salary that the GM CEO makes in the whatever umpteen millions plus the stock options and the whatever. And those workers, at least now some of them actually do get stock options, but the disparity is, what's that word that keeps cropping up? The asymmetry. That's the asymmetry is out in the Mideast war. Well, the asymmetry in corporate America as opposed to workers is just unconscionable. So yeah, I can see why strikes back in the days, unions were getting a bad rap because management was saying, we can do better for you. And in some places, that's how Starbucks and how Amazon and who these other folk, non-union places that started rolling in profits and not paying their workers commensurate, comparable salaries. So anyway,
I
They
mean,
only do better for, I'm sorry, go ahead,
no, go
Bob.
ahead, Alan.
They only do better for workers when they're threatened by unionization. All of a sudden, when they're threatened by unionization, then they're the workers' friend.
there you go. Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just going to say that Mary Barra over at GM, she's been the CEO there for a while. She's better liked than some of the previous ones. But you're right. The executive pay is still out of whack because you're right, Eric. The auto industry almost failed in this country after the Bush administration, and it was saved. And auto workers back then took a lot of freezes and cuts and layoffs. And all the argument today is you're better, make us better too.
The bottom line is, I don't want to point fingers at just the female CEO because those are the guys that are making tons of money just like she is. The reason why she pops into my head was the auto workers singled her out to just say, okay, look at this. And so I said, oh yeah, that's not too good. But I know the other guys are making comparable salaries. So we don't need to beat up on her, but yeah, that's ongoing. I hope the writers, now that they're back, are keeping an eye on making sure the actors don't get stiff swinging out there in the wind. They need to make sure those guys walked out for them, with them, solidarity wise. So I hope the writers are pressing to get these actors a better contract now that they're back in. What else is out there that's not getting it? Oh yes, the war in Ukraine. Everybody's completely forgotten the war in Ukraine. Zelensky was flabbergasted about the fact that all of a sudden his life and death struggles on the double back burner. He had to say, look, this is just playing into Putin's hands, this Middle East war. So, you know, basically he's saying, don't drop the ball just because this thing is going on. And I'm saying, yeah, he's right. We can't let Israeli-HAMAS war suck up all the oxygen, but
And the money. And the money.
And the money. Speaking of the war and the money, Ukraine can't get any help, and Biden's promising help to Israel. He's not promising any help to Palestinians, but he's promising help to Israel. I know he doesn't want to promise help to Hamas because they're listed as a terrorist organization. I get the nuance of that, but when you look at the disparity of aid, whether it's Hamas or West Bank, giant asymmetry. There's that word again, giant asymmetry in the help that's going over to the Mideast. But we're a dysfunctional government, as everybody's saying, because look what's going on. Where are we, Alan, with the House of Representatives?
Well, you know, they're minute by minute updates, but the basic problem is that the Republican Party of the United States is a coalition of the irresponsible who work with anti-government right-wingers, overt and covert racists, what I can only describe as crazies, who combine all those traits.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, last week, one small fraction of the crazies was able to knock off the speaker. And now there's the Republicans who hold a very small majority in the House of Representatives have to select a new speaker. Well, by a vote of 113 to 99, they nominated this guy Scalise from Louisiana. But that 199 who voted against him, I'm sorry, that 99 are not all going to vote for him when it comes to the vote for speaker. And he's got to get a majority of the House. It doesn't look like he will, because some of the craziest of the crazists, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, have already announced they're not voting for him. Well, if that doesn't happen, the United States government can't proceed. But even Scalise is not a desirable person. He's on record of having compared himself with David Duke, who was the head of the American Klan.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember when Scalise was a pariah, as far as I was concerned, because he was almost as racist in his statements as David Duke. So why would I want to see him ascending to the Speaker of the House? People in this country have short memories. They don't remember who this guy was back then, and I don't think he's changed stripes since.
Now,
And
his
it-
main, I'm sorry, go on.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, Matt Gaetz, the congressman who's been, he's one of the leading crackpots in American government, and I can say that with confidence.
The guy
Of
who
course-
brought us to where we are now? Yeah, that guy.
and of course he didn't have a plan. He's not a deep thinker. He went ahead and did this, didn't have a plan. Here we are. And like you said, Alan, we can't function as a government without the House. The House doesn't have a speaker. It can't pass funding. It can't, God help us if it lasts to another funding for our own government, to another government shutdown. So he had no plan. And here we are in deep, I can't use that word here, in deep stuff.
Doo-doo, or what Nancy poo-poos?
We're waist deep in the big muddy. And
Yes,
the
we
big
are.
fool says to push on.
Yes.
But you
So-
talk
Pete
about
Seeger.
governments and dysfunctional governments. The interesting thing is I was watching Al Jazeera's coverage, BBC's coverage, and the Israeli government was having all kinds of problems coming up with their coalition, wartime government coalition. What do they call it? Unity government, right? And so my concern is, everything I'm hearing is, how soon and when are they going to go in and lay waste to the Gaza Strip, as opposed to what are we doing to tamp down all this craziness that's going on over there? Alan, you were talking about Thomas Friedman's column in the New York Times, I believe it was, about the fact that maybe the Israelis might want to think twice about going in and leveling. Give us Friedman's perspective. Might as well give credit to where somebody might have a sensible thought of, go ahead.
Well, Friedman has been covering Arab and Israeli conflicts, I don't know, for 50 years. And he was very interesting. He explained that the Hamas attack on Israel was a reaction to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's supreme goal. And Netanyahu's goal has been to make peace with the other Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, and not give the Palestinians a single inch. And that's what Friedman wrote. And that Netanyahu's life mission is to prove to everyone that Israel can have its cake and eat it. That to get the Arab states to accept its legitimacy without giving up any of the Palestinian territory that it occupies.
So the cake he wants to eat is the Palestinian state never coming into being, right? And so Hamas has said, okay, enough is enough. Unfortunately, and this is why it's just such a miasma or whatever, a crazy, the fact that they would target innocent civilians to make their point is just so, like that was them doing their thing to get the overreaction. But I think they should have thought of another way to get the overreaction without this kind of innocent slaughter. And so I can see why people are condemning Hamas as a terrorist group for doing what they're doing. You can't get away from that kind of atrocity. We have to remember that, the West Bank folk, the folk in Gaza, how long has that blockade been going on? The blockade that doesn't let anything in, so that those people are really, they're not even third, 10th class citizens. They're cobbling an existence together for years, because tell us what's being cut off. Supplies, oil, give our viewers a rundown.
Well, from 1948 to 1967, Gaza, which is about the size of Manhattan, was controlled by Egypt. In 1967, Israel seized Gaza, and Israel directly occupied Gaza from 1967 to 2006, at which point Israel just pulled back, leaving Gaza as basically a prison camp for 2.5 million people.
Well, because Israel, they put in a blockade when they pulled back.
No.
Yeah,
So nothing goes in and out of Gaza.
The punchline, Al.
Yeah.
They pulled
So
out,
nothing can
and
go
then
in
they
and
put
out.
a cordon around the strip.
on land and on sea
Oh, man.
and by air.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, I I can understand the built-up anger and hate, unfortunately, built up over the decades because they're boxed in. They can't move freely. They're under outside control all the time. They don't have equal rights. I can understand the anger. What Hamas did over the weekend, no, I'm sorry, full stop. That's pure. There's no way you can justify any of that. They went into a festival and shot innocent people.
Yeah.
They went into a community, an unarmed community, and shot up families, including children. There's no justifying that. I understand the anger, but this is the worst possible situation. You have that anger mixed with Netanyahu's far-right crazies, and that mix is just nuclear, I hate to say that word, explosive.
Yeah, that's been that entire area has been a trouble spot before the Camp David Accords and after the Camp David Accords. And the Camp David Accords, I believe, is when they finally came about saying they're going to have a two-state solution. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And that was that the point where they finally recognized Israel's right to exist in that accord?
Palestinians.
The Palestinians.
That's what I mean.
Not the folks in Gaza. Right.
No. Yeah, correct. Correct.
And so for years after the Camp David Accords, people have been pushing to try to come up with solutions to forward the goal of the two-state solution so the Palestinians wouldn't feel like they've been stripped of their homeland and they have nothing. And what you said, Friedman said about Netanyahu is correct. What we have seen is not what Israel has said, but what Israel has done. Friedman put it right. He kept letting those settlers move in, letting them take more territory, and the Palestinians kept going, that's our land. That's where we're supposed to build a state. So, the students who don't understand nuance as well as most adults because their frontal lobe aren't fully developed or whatever it is, they're the ones who are putting out these serious things saying this is all Israel's fault. They need to own this, blah, 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 because they're looking at this kinds of stuff. They're not looking at, I saw a report where Hamas took this woman and then they took her cell phone and then they murdered her and used her own cell phone to put that up on her Facebook page. You can't do stuff like that and expect sympathy for your cause. That is just horrendous behavior. And so, yeah, they need condemnation. We could be talking in circles among ourselves about how bad it is over there. Talk about the Hofstra nuanced letter. That's a good way that puts it in perspective.
Susan Poser, who's the president of Hofstra where I work, I really put out a very good letter. And what she wrote was, the world woke up on Saturday morning to news of the horrific, brutal attack by Hamas in Israel and the unspeakable organized violence and hostage-taking against men, women, and children. Hofstra University mourns the loss of life, and we fear that the situation will move this part of the world even further from lasting peace. As a community, we must abhor violence. At the same time, individuals can have differing political views, particularly given the complexity of the politics and history of the region of the world. At this difficult time, let us come together at the Hofstra community with mutual respect and support for each other. Okay. I like that. I was very supportive. I also think that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a very important statement. Yeah. She condemned violence, she condemned hatred, she condemned anti-Semitism. But she made clear that the United States and Americans should reject both Hamas's horrifying attacks against innocent civilians, as well as the grave injustices and violence Palestinians face under occupation. Now,
actually, she hit the nail on the head there, because interestingly enough, I was watching Al Jazeera's coverage of that weekend debacle, the launch of the terrorist attack, the whole bit, however you want to phrase it. And you would see families from the Israeli side who've been suffering, and you would see families from the Palestinian side who had been suffering from the air attacks that Israel had launched in its retaliatory. And so what you were seeing are the civilian casualties on both sides that lead you to understand that this is not a one-sided affair. My problem with the coverage I was seeing, Al Jazeera and the BBC was making a very good effort to try to get coverage from the Palestinian side. When I'm looking at CNN, I'm seeing a lot of the stories about the horror and the atrocities, but I'm not seeing anything. And I wasn't watching it 24 hours, so they may have circled back around and done exactly what the BBC and Al Jazeera did, but the CNN stuff was Israeli suffering, Israeli suffering, Israeli suffering. And the local news I was seeing today, one local news had the Israeli-HAMAS War, which lets you understand that there are two groups in this conflict, and there are stuff you need to hear both sides. The other graphic I saw was Israel at war. Israel at war. Okay, what does that say? We don't even care who Israel is at war with. They're just at war. And that's my concern about how media across the board is or is not covering that area and this new situation in a more nuanced and a more balanced way. What else?
And I've been trying to keep an eye on that. I mean, when we talk about this war, I noticed of course, the media always says Hamas, which is important because everyone in that every Palestinian doesn't support Hamas. Mm-hmm. So that's a distinction that needs to be made. I did see some coverage coming out of Gaza, and there's an image that sticks with me with a man and his two daughters in the back of an ambulance. One of his looks like his older daughter. Her face was sheet white from, I guess, sheetrock dust, all over her face, and she wasn't crying, but her eyes were vacant, like she couldn't believe what was going on, and the little child was just confused. Mm-hmm. And the father was hugging both of them in the back of the ambulance, and that was in Gaza. And I was like, that's the image people need to see. There's real suffering on both sides. And Alan, when we were on the phone before we went on air, you used a great phrase, which I don't want to steal, in terms of how the Israel responds. You said collective. I don't want to steal the phrase.
Collective punishment.
Yes, the collective punishment. You're there. You're punished. It's indiscriminate, and when you see entire apartment buildings go down, that's not specific to one group or one.
Yeah,
that's everybody.
Right. AOC called for a ceasefire, but the United States policy under President Biden has been to rearm Israel so that it continued to fire missiles. And the United Nations has pointed out that about 1/3 Palestinians in Gaza have already been displaced by the bombing. There is no excuse to the attack on children, to the attack on the music festival, but Israel is pledging to crush Hamas, and that's going to crush all of those people. And this is what Thomas Friedman said, that is not going to bring stability or peace to the Middle East. It's going to undermine it. I don't have an answer.
And just to keep us on track, we have about 3 minutes left.
I don't have an answer, but escalation is never the answer.
So there's a thing about semantics and coverage and phrases for support, etc. And one of the BBC anchors was interviewing the ambassador to the UK from Palestinians, West Bank, and the guy was saying to him, you know, there's this similarity to the way you folks will cover our area. You will hear Israel say, we take great pains to avoid collateral damage. And they say that all the time. This is the Palestinian rep saying this to the guy. And you guys just suck that up as gospel. And on the ground, we can tell you, there is no painstaking care to avoid collateral damage. Our people are getting killed and getting bombed out of existence and wounded and maimed. And if that's what they call taking care to avoid collateral damage, well, you can understand why there's a problem going on in the Mideast. And so this whole bit about phraseology and the other phrase that's used, Israel has a right to defend itself. Of course, every country has a right to defend itself. But that's a phrase that's trotted out every time conflagration breaks up. And so by defending itself, what was that phrase you just came up with, Alan? Collective punishment. Well, when they defend themselves, they heap down collective punishment on the other side. And that's why I'm saying I hate what Hamas did. That was just so unforgivable. That's the word, really. Just so unforgivable. But I have to say, I cannot sit here and watch apartheid stuff being heaped on the Palestinian with little or no rights. The folks in Gaza with no rights whatsoever. Al, you were saying they have few rights. They got no rights. If you really look at it coldly, they got no rights. So yeah, there's got to be a better solution for what's going on. Vengeance and retaliation is not the answer, but wrap it up for us, Alan, so we can put it in perspective and go home.
Yeah, and we have about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
30 seconds.
In response to the Holocaust, European American Jewry has always said never again. And then now people are saying this has happened again. But the real question is, how do we prevent something like this from happening again? How do we build a just and lasting peace? And I don't see the Israeli response doing that. And how do we stop this kind of assault that Hamas did? I don't know.
We're going to let that be the final word on this day's discussion. Thank you, Dr. Alan Singer, for joining Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And this was a good discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And we'll catch you the next time, folks.